Welcome back, honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the exploration period, particularly focusing on the expansion of the Spanish into North America, right? And so we spent a lot of time in class with me getting super hyped up and discussing the rise of the Spanish conquistadors, right? Particularly focusing in on the conquest of the Aztecs by Hernan Cortez, right? Now, we only got about halfway through our entire explanation of the conquest of the Aztecs by Hernan Cortez because I got really excited and ended up sacrificing Marcella in 5th period and stuff like that. And then I also ended up just talking about ripping people's hearts out in 1st period. So you gotta do what you gotta do, you know what I mean? So the thing about it, though, is that's exactly where we left off. We left off talking about the massive technological and, sophisticated innovations of the Aztec people, but also finished off discussing their practice of human sacrifice and their polytheistic religion, right? So the thing about it that we need to understand, though, is we're gonna pick right back up where we left off in the story, though, of Cortez keeping his conquest going, right? So he showed up on the shores of what is now modern-day Mexico in 1519 and continues his conquest of the Aztec people, right? Now, the thing about it that we understand is where we left off in the story. He has just burned his ships, and Moctezuma, the king of the Aztecs, has sent him a buttload of gifts, right? A bunch of gifts and stuff like that, hoping that Cortez would turn around and go the other way, and of course, that's not what happened. So Cortez is going to end up instead heading directly towards Tenochtitlan, right? Which is the name of the Aztec capital city with over 1 million people in it that has a team of street sweepers, and the whole thing's built on top of water, which is super cool, all right? The Aztec capital city, though, will have an interaction with Cortez and his armies, but not until after Cortez stops along the way and begins to make alliances with the conquered tribes. Now, what I mean by that is, remember, the Aztecs took over a huge swath of land using these weapons, right? They took over everything you see there in yellow. And then they took people from those people, right? Or took people from those other tribes and would have them sacrificed and stuff like that in their entire multifaceted polytheistic religion structure. This is going to make a lot of them angry and going to make a lot of them not like the Aztecs very much. So Cortez is going to use that dissent, right? He is going to use that negativity, and he's going to actually make allies with those other local tribes that the Aztec had actually taken over in the process. And so when this entire thing happens, though, he does get all the way to Tenochtitlan, and he has a meeting with Moctezuma, right? And of course, Moctezuma, being very smart and brilliant, and not at all at one point thinking that they were gods, which was ridiculous, all right? So now, he knew that they were people, he knew that they were common people, he knew that they were men, right? He just knew that they had technology that they had never seen before, right? So he treated them with reverence, and he welcomed them into, of course, Tenochtitlan. And what's going to happen immediately after the conversation starts is Cortez is going to be like, let me tell you about a guy named Jesus, right? And so what's going to end up happening is Cortez attempts to push Christianity onto the Aztec people through their ruler. Moctezuma is then officially going to be like, no thank you. We are okay. We have this whole polytheistic thing. We got this really intense destructive god that's like a flying white snake monster. He sticks his tongue out and stuff like that, and if we don't sacrifice people to him, he might destroy all of us, right? And so the thing about it, though, is you also have to understand that Moctezuma himself is connected to the religious structure of the Aztecs, right? He is considered their god king. So he is literally a part of their entire theocracy system. So the thing about it is Moctezuma is not going to renege on his people and then literally go yeah, we're just going to start doing Christmas and stuff like that. That's not going to happen, right? So he refuses to adopt Christianity, and what's going to happen is Cortez is going to take Moctezuma as a prisoner, right? Now, what's going to end up happening, though, in this process, Cortez actually leaves for a couple of days, and then the soldiers of, the conquistadors behind, they actually bring Moctezuma out onto a balcony, and they actually, are like, hey, tell all those people down there, tell your Aztec people that we're good and they should listen to us, and maybe sprinkle in some Jesus in there if you want to, right? Moctezuma, under the tip of a sword and underneath duress, tries to communicate with the Aztec people, trying to say that they should not actually be viewing the Spanish as a threat. Well, the thing about it, though, is that Moctezuma's people who view him as a god are like, wait a minute, that could not be our god king. He would never tell us to actually give in to those people. So they start pelting that balcony with rocks, right? And we believe that Moctezuma actually will die in this process, and we think he was bludgeoned to death with stones by his own people because they thought he might be an imposter or something like that. So the Aztecs are actually going to pick up their weapons and fight off the very few Spanish men that are there, right? Because it's only a couple of hundred of them, where there are millions of Aztec people that live in and around Tenochtitlan, right? So what's going to happen is the Aztecs fight back, and the Spanish are repelled, but in this process, Moctezuma does end up dying. Now, Cortez, though, is going to come back, right, from that little bit of a journey away. He's going to return with not only some Spanish reinforcements, but also with the allies that he had made along the way. With the native tribes that he had convinced, he would help actually go against the Aztecs with them, and he actually uses that alliance to destroy Tenochtitlan and also attack the Aztec. Now, the thing about it, though, is that we need to understand is that the Aztec had a very ferocious army, right? They had a massive military replete with obsidian swords, and also they had a multicultural structure, and they were technologically advanced, and they knew, by sheer numbers, the Aztecs probably could have fought off not only the native allies and the Spanish as well. But the problem is that the second that Cortez and his men got there, they had inadvertently began to spread that biological weapon known as smallpox, which there's going to be a massive smallpox outbreak in Tenochtitlan, weakening their army and making them very susceptible to take over. And so the Spanish will use the native allies and that weakness to take over in force. And they actually end up destroying the bulk of Tenochtitlan, destroying many of their relics, their artifacts, and also creating a system in which the Aztec will be then subservient to the Spanish, right? So going into it, though, we have to understand that that's one particular instance of the Spanish conquest of the native tribes, right? And the Spanish conquest basically destroying something really, really awesome, which was the Aztec people and all of their amazing innovations, right? Now, the next thing that we have to understand about, though, is there's another tribe very, very nearby known as the Inca, right? And this another guy that's actually one of Cortez's cousins named Francisco Pizarro is going to be sent there, right? So the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro wants to go down and take over the Inca, which are located in modern-day Peru, right? They are also extremely advanced. And fun fact, they actually had even more gold and access to gold mines. So Pizarro is going to be the one that goes after the Inca, right? So in this process, what we need to understand is just like with the Aztecs, they are very advanced people, right? They are literally able to construct massive cities on top of mountains, y'all. The big things that's different about the Inca from the Aztecs is you have to understand that they're just intrinsically just as sophisticated as the Aztecs, but just in some different ways. So where they're going to be located in Peru is they're going to be at the base and along the Andes Mountains, right? So what we need to understand about that is that this people is able to create a kingdom that's over 10,000 miles in length, right? That had trade routes that spanned over 10,000 miles, and they were able to build their cities on top of mountains. This one being, of course, their most famous religious site that is still their best preserved city. It is known as Machu Picchu in Peru, which is on the top 10 places I want to go list, right? And speaking of, though, is in this entire sophistication process, being able to expand your entire empire over huge, huge swaths of mountains in the Andes Mountains, they also, like I said, had 10,000 miles of trade routes, right? Now, with those trade routes, you would think that they would probably have developed a written language system to be able to account for all of the product that's moving over all these different roads. Interestingly enough, they didn't. The Incans actually never developed a writing system. Instead, they used a numbering system that actually looked like this. These things right here are how they actually took numbers and inventory. Those bad boys are known as quipus, right? Quipu is spelled Q-U-I-P-O-S, right? Quipus are their numbering system with these little knots on threads, and we still don't know how to decipher it directly, but we do know it's an accountant system to be able to figure out how much movement or how much product is moving on these trade routes and how much is coming and going, right? Now, another cool thing about the Inca, though, is that they're going to domesticate the llama, which is really super, super cool. And for any of you that are actually big Emperor's New Groove fans, you know that that's actually a really, really big deal. But they do actually domesticate llamas, which are actually cousins of camels. Fun fact. So yeah. But the thing that you need to understand, though, some of you are like, but wait a minute, Mr. Terry, I thought the Native Americans never domesticated large beasts of burden. Yeah, they didn't, and llamas are, yes, a beast of burden, and they are what you would consider an animal that would be used for farming and stuff like that. But but llamas can only carry about 60 pounds on their back, right? They can't carry a whole human, right? So they're not going to be domesticated in nearly the same effort that British, or not British, but Europeans domesticated cows, pigs, sheep, and chickens, right? So the thing that you have to understand, though, is that they do actually domesticate an animal, and they domesticated llamas. And what the llamas were used for were actually carrying agricultural products in and out of systems like this, because what the Incans use is a form of steppe farming, right? Steppe farming, or steep farming as it's also referred to, is what it looks like right here. Because how the heck do you farm on the side of a mountain, right? The way you do it is by cutting etches into the sides of the mountains themselves and flattening surfaces out, right? They would plant on the flattened surfaces that actually multi-layered their way up the entire way. So that right there is how they actually farmed. On every single flat surface you see, they would actually plant different things that they would use for farming. And one of of the biggest things that they farmed, that I want you to keep this in the back of your mind back here, is potatoes, right? Peruvians and Incans actually invented, domesticated, and cultivated potatoes before the Europeans had ever even known what they were, right? So, like, think about it, though, going into our next one, is they also, as well, practiced human sacrifice, right? So, like, the Aztecs, when they did sacrifice, though, they cut somebody's chest cavity open, rip the heart out, and stick it in a jaguar jar, right? The Incans, on the other hand, sacrificed children, right? They sacrificed actually typically, usually like kids from the age of like 11 to 15, right? And the interesting thing about it as well is, as you remember with the Aztecs, that this sacrificial system created resentment with the tribes that they had taken over. In the Incan community, it was considered a glory, an honor, a privilege to have your child sacrificed to the gods, right? Now, interestingly enough, what they would actually do after these sacrifices, though, which way they would usually strangle the kid to death or bludgeon them or whatever, what they would do afterwards is they would mummify the bodies, right? This right here is the body of a child sacrifice from the Incans that actually is a girl that was sacrificed over 600 years ago. And y'all, look at her. She looks like she could just stand up, right? But yes, they would mummify these bodies as a way of like reverence in their religious system, right? And that right there is Francisco Pizarro, the guy that's going to end up coming in here and ruining everyone's good time. And then that guy right there is Atahualpa, right? And Atahualpa is the king of the Incans, right? So now, just like Moctezuma was the king of the Aztecs, now Atahualpa is the king of the Incans, right? Now, the Incans, though, just something to keep in the back of your mind, their numbers were extremely low. So it's actually going to be a very, very swift and aggressive action by Pizarro and the Spanish to go in there and try to take them over as fast as possible. Now, the reason why they were so low is because they had just had a civil war. Now, why they had actually had a civil war is because Atahualpa and his brother were feuding with one another to see who was going to be the rightful king of the Incan people. And Atahualpa is going to be the one that wins, right? Now, when he wins, though, something we need to understand is what this Incan civil war may have looked like, all right? So when we understand that, we have to see what their military was like, because we looked at the Aztec swords that were made of obsidian and stuff like that. But this right here, y'all, this is what Incan military looked like, okay? So the Incans were very, very famously known for not having weaponry that was as sophisticated as the Aztecs, right? They used weapons that were primarily derived from stone, right? They used stone maces and stuff like that, or stone clubs, stone spears, and wooden shafted weapons. They would sometimes use a sling, but they also used cloth armor, which is not going to be very effective versus guys like this and the Spanish, who were using guns, cannons, horses, and other very large, like, forgeable metal weapons. This right here is another very famous Incan weapon known as a bolas, which is actually 3 rocks tied to 3 different strings, and you could swing it and throw it, and it would actually wrap up around somebody's legs or cause some pretty big damage. But again, it's not going to do much next to a Spanish steel sword or to an actual gun. Now, going into it, though, Atahualpa had heard about what had happened to the Aztec. He knows that these people are very, very strong, but what his plan is going to be is to try and ambush them, right? So Atahualpa tried to come up with an idea to meet these Spanish conquistadors at a very, very neutral location known as Cajamarca, which is an Incan city, right? His plan is to actually show up with thousands of soldiers and to basically jump the Spanish when they least expect it, right? But what ends up happening at the Battle of Cajamarca is the Incans show up with about 1,000 troops, and the Spanish only have a couple hundred, right? Now, you would think that, you know, when you're outnumbered 5-1, that it wouldn't really be too bad of a job to be able to, like, kind of beat up those 200 people. Well, what ends up happening at the Battle of Cajamarca is really, really important, and I need you to jot this down. The Spanish used their technology to swiftly and aggressively knock out the Incan army, right? They used guns, cannons, horses, and ambush tactics to actually basically take the plan that Atahualpa had, which was to spring a trap on them, and they actually used it to capture Atahualpa himself. And we'll talk about what exactly happened at the Battle of Cajamarca in class, because I'll draw it on the board, so leave a little bit of space in your notes, and I'm going to show you what ended up happening and why it's such a pivotal moment. But what ends up happening after that battle is Atahualpa is taken hostage, right? And he is held for ransom. Okay, they take him back to the capital city known as Cusco, and there they actually talk to him about how much money the Incans must pay if they want to keep him alive. And Atahualpa takes them into their temple of the sun god, which is a very, very large pyramided room, and they take him inside this big room, and what Atahualpa says is that we could fill this room right here 2 times over with gold for you if that's what you want. And y'all, it's a giant room, and so the Spanish are like, I'm sorry, what? And so they actually say okie dokie, and they demand 2 roomfuls of gold, right? Which would be worth in the millions of dollars in the modern era. So King Atahualpa and the Incan people pay this ransom, but what they end up doing is they actually end up killing Atahualpa anyway, because they're scumbags and they're awful, and they actually literally ended up strangling him to death and insulting him in a religious ceremony, because they cremated his body, and the Incans believe that if your body is separated or burned after death, that your spirit will never truly rest, which is really messed up. They also, like, baptized him Catholic, like, right beforehand, and changed his name to Anthony, and then also on top of everything else is that even at the time in the Catholic religion, to cremate somebody was seen as kind of a way that they're like it's not a proper burial, so that's like more insult to injury, which is really rude and super screwed up. But what the Spanish are going to end up doing is taking over the Incan kingdom and also Peru as well, and beginning to expand their territory even further. So what we need to understand as well from the off the heels of that is you're going to begin to see what is known as the rise of colonization. What you're going to start seeing by the mid-1500s is that Spain is going to begin to claim a vast territory stretching from California all the way to South America, right? So everything that you see here in red, and then later on they would add even the provinces that are actually in pink. What you're seeing all there is the area that Spain begins to claim, because they took this area from the Aztecs, this area from the Incans, and they're going to begin to expand out and claim these vast swaths of territory as time goes on. Now, really quickly, what we need to understand, though, is that when you go to college one day, if you take a history course at any point, a history professor will probably stand in front of you and talk about the big three motivators of colonization by the Spanish, particularly at this time, and they all start with G, right? And the big three motivators were known as God, gold, and glory, right? We will explain what we will explain what God means. We will explain what glory or gold means. We are not going to talk about glory, though, because glory is pretty self-explanatory. So let's just knock it out of the park right now, right? The biggest reason when we're talking about these as motivations or overall motivations for the Spanish in general when it comes to creating colonies and starting a vast intercontinental and also transatlantic trade colony-based system is going to be the fact that glory was just seen as a way for them to try and have more territory than their next door neighbors, right? Like, y'all know that Portugal is in this game. France and England are going to swiftly get involved in this game. The Dutch are getting involved in this game as well. The Spanish want more land than them. That is the glory aspect, right? They want to have the most land with the most profitability and make the most get economic and military gains off of that land. That's the glory part, right? They just want to have more than the competition, okay? Now, the God and the gold parts are pretty important, but the God part we can explain in like 2 seconds, right? And when we look at the God motivator, we have to understand that that's just spreading Christianity, right? Spain believes that winning souls for Christianity is just as important as winning land. That's why when Columbus showed up in the Caribbean, he plants a cross and not only claims the land in the name of Spain, but also in the name of Christianity, Christians, and Christ as well. However, the Spanish, though, are later going to use native refusal when the natives refuse to actually convert to Christianity as justification for violence and aggressive action against them, which is garbage and rude and screwed up, because like I said 100 times, what group of people is ever going to be like, oh, thank you for bringing me a new religion that I didn't ask about? Now, like, so going into like the next one that we have to understand is gold, right? Now, this is the big one. Now, I told you I could explain the God part in one slide, right? The gold part takes a lot of explaining, because we're now getting into economics and we're getting into how the Spanish are going to use these new lands to grow their wealth, right? Now, looking at the growth of gold, you have to understand that when we're looking at this, we literally mean gold, right? Like, so like at the earliest parts of Spanish colonization, one of the biggest things that they're going to be after is actual mineral wealth, gold and silver, right? Because that is the most valuable thing that Spain wants from the Americas. Because remember, the Aztecs had large gold deposits. The Incans had a lot of gold, but when they were mining this gold out of the ground, they were using stone, wood, or obsidian tools, right? Which cannot dig a mine very, very far, all right? Whereas the Spanish are now going to bring with them metal tools that can dig mines further than they've ever been dug, right? By using these advanced tools, mines are now going to go deeper and deeper than the natives could ever get, and they're going to access even larger, untouched gold deposits in many of these mountains, chains, and then also in many of these new mines that they're going to create. Now, the thing that we need to understand, though, is that who is going to be working these mines? It's not the explorers, it's not the conquistadors, and it's not the Europeans. They're going to force the natives to do it in awful, terrible, disgusting conditions where mines were known to collapse and where overheating, and then also ventilation windows were known to collapse, and then also ventilation shafts that had literal burning fires at the bottom of them to try and get gas and noxious methane and things like that out of the actual out of the actual mine itself. kids would be used to like travel through these smaller shafts to get to these ventilation windows, and sometimes falling and dying. All right, so now these conditions were awful, and it led to large scale death rates of these native people, right? Now, continuing as well, though, going further, you have to understand that gold is not the only thing they want. It is the biggest thing they want, but it's not the only thing they want. The other thing that they want as well is farmland, right? They want land to grow this new stuff that they're seeing in new untouched farmlands and fields, right? They look at these forests and open fields and this fertile soil as a place where they can grow what you would refer to as raw materials, right? The colonies that are going to be created by the Spanish are going to be mainly focused on growing raw materials and shipping them back to Spain. Raw materials include things like foods, cotton that has been unprocessed, and sugarcane. What I mean by a raw material is any natural good in its unprocessed state. For example, timber is another raw material, or cotton in its raw form would be considered a raw material. But once you process it into a shirt, it's no longer raw materials anymore. You see what I'm talking about? What they would do is they would grow these raw materials in these new colonies, ship them up back over to Europe, and have them processed in some of these early factories, right? So going into what you have to understand, though, as well, cotton, I know a lot of y'all are like, from being in American schools, believe that that's going to be one of the first things that Spanish start actually growing, and it's not. The biggest thing that the Spanish actually start growing in the Caribbean, South America, and Central America is actually sugarcane, because it was so profitable, right? It was an extremely profitable crop that grew very, very well in Central and South America, and what's going to happen is the reason why it was so profitable is because mainly it made very, very expensive things. It made sugar after it was processed. It also made molasses and rum, right? And rum, of course, being a very simple alcohol that people could access, and sugar being a necessity for many people back in Europe, and molasses actually being very important not only for preservation uses, and also sweetening things, and also being used in other baked foods and goods as well, become very, very profitable things. But just like the mines, sugar growing requires a very large workforce, and we will talk more about that large workforce and exactly what that looks like and what happened in class tomorrow. But I'll see y'all soon. Check the Google Classroom so you can actually see exactly what the quiz tomorrow will be on, but I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.